My name is Nicola Curry. I'm a member of People Before Profit, and I'm not going to stay talking because we have a very good lineup of speakers, and I'm sure the people yourselves want to get in on this conversation. So we have Andrew St. Ledger from the Woodlands League. We have, excuse me now, just Fergal McLaughlin from Keep Ireland Open, and Richard Boyd Barrett from People Before Profit. And that's the order that they're going to speak in. So I'm going to hand you straight over to Andrew St. Ledger. He's going to talk for about 15 minutes. And then we'll let Fergal in, and then Richard in, and then we'll open it up to the floor and hopefully get a good discussion going.
Okay, thanks very much for coming, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm the PRO of the Woodland League, and it was set up in around 2002 with kind of in anticipation almost of privatisation. Because this issue has come up before in the 1980s, before Coillte. It was the old Forest Service. And the same forces were at work then looking to privatise public assets, and it was blocked. There was a lot of resistance to it. So basically they just waited, and Coillte were established in the meantime to, I suppose, commercialise forestry, and it was set up as a semi-state private limited company with a remit for primacy of profit and timber production. There's no kind of responsibility for social or environmental issues at the time they were set up. The Woodland League were, as individuals, we were involved in the certification process of Coillte for their FSC eco-label, and that was a kind of farcical situation which was supposed to balance social, environmental and economic concerns. I was on the environmental panel representing many community groups, and I resigned with the person that was involved, Brendan Kelly, was on the social panel. We both resigned and set up the Woodland League as a vehicle that could independently monitor forestry, and I suppose also just relay issues around forestry that many communities up and down the country had been having. And we would have collected stories and put together a report, Forestry in Ireland, a Citizen's Perspective, in 2005. We brought that report to European commissioners via Cathy Sinnott. We had an opportunity to go to Brussels, and we presented a list of complaints about Ireland's forestry. So that's just a brief background of the Woodland League, and since then, we've been campaigning. We have three aims. One is the regeneration of Ireland's native forests, the reform of Irish forest policy, and the restoration of a forest culture in Ireland. And that's what on a voluntary basis, we've been trying to progress those issues. The wholesale privatisation came back up again, as you know, in 2009, and it's led to where we are today. That again, public awareness has been slow with so much going on. People are bombarded, so many different issues that the forests were under the radar for a while, but they are under serious threat, and it's good that at last people seem to be grasping the seriousness of this situation. Just going back to, as I say, the restoration of Ireland's forest culture. Ireland has a unique tradition of woodlands. The Irish people are woodland people who lost their woodlands, they lost their home. It was part of the colonisation process, which involves asset stripping. It's still going on today, and Ireland was like no other. It gradually lost its forests. It's been referred to by Ted Cook of the Woodland League as the situation we're in now is NAMA 3. That NAMA 1 was the Elizabethan conquest, which commandeered people's the Gaelic assets. The second NAMA 2, was Cromwell. Cromwell paid his officers in land and forests. And the Hollow Blade Sword Company in London, I think they're still registered there in the stock exchange, they were given the task of redistribution of Irish land. And it was the forest, most of this, like in the 1600s, we still had 1/8 of the country under primeval woodland. And it was one or two, Sir Valentine Brown, I think, inherited Walter Raleigh's estate or something in Cork, became the wealthiest man in the United Kingdom. He was able to loan money to the Queen, or to the royal family. He was so rich from the sale of Irish oak at 1 shilling per sound oak. He became seriously rich. So what happened after the 1600s, the final destruction of the forests would have been for charcoal making, for the iron industry. And that finished off by the 1700s. Jonathan Swift travelled the country and wrote, as Drapier, anonymous letters to the English Parliament saying about the state of this country, the destitution and the poverty and the fact there wasn't hardly a tree left in the place. And it was no coincidence then, not long afterwards, you have famine. When you lose a great resource like your forests, within 2-3 generations you will have famine. And that's repeated historically. And we don't see, or we've not really heard that connection made. So the importance of your forests as a resource, it's, you know, the world has, or human beings, we're indebted to trees and forests. All of our technology, all of our progress, all of our shelter, materials, fire itself came from forests, from the trees. So they're a serious resource. The type of forestry that we inherited in the new state in 1922 was an English model that came about basically to supply fast-growing trees after World War I. England had a serious problem because of its empire, it had no problem getting timber from the colonies, but the German U-boats caused a big problem with sinking of shipping. And that caused they lost a lot of timber, and they realised that they needed to replenish their own stocks, and Ireland was part of the equation at that stage. So we had a very outdated, unsustainable forestry model that's not basically designed for Irish people or communities or for the benefits of Ireland. We have an exotic conifer policy that's heavily reliant on machinery. It doesn't give too many benefits. If I may just go back to the beginnings of Ireland's forestry, Horace Plunkett, the founder of the cooperative movement, he established what's called a recess committee in 1895, and this led to the establishment of the Department of Agriculture in 1899. So I'll just read a bit from the report. There is no reason why the country should not again largely recover its forest area. Of the existing area of so-called wasteland, at least 3 million acres are calculated by competent authorities to be capable of growing one kind or another of timber. And with this extension of forests would come the very great and valuable variety of industries in connection with the working of wood. He goes on to list the planting. You're talking about a shelter belt along the west coast would protect lands from the violence of Atlantic storms, which carry with them far inland many ingredients injurious to agricultural produce. The planting of mountains would tend to equalise rainfall and temperature and prevent upland soils being washed away by torrents and rivers being silted up and lowlands flooded. Forests help the preservation of birds, which prey on insects hurtful to crops. When planted on the banks of rivers, they encourage the increase of fish by reason of their shade, the steady supply of water they promote, and so on. He goes on this, but that's not the type of forestry that we ended up with. He's talking about mixed species, broadleaf woodland, not, as I say, monocultures of plantations that acidify the soil. And also acidify rivers. The fishing has been destroyed by the type of forest policy that we've adopted without debate. How are we fixed for time?
You 7 minutes left.
Okay. Now, just talking about, the Woodland League have proposed an alternative vision. That's a pilot project proposal for a community-based initiative. And, we believe there should be a public works program of basically transforming a lot of the wasteland, the plantations. 500,000 acres was identified by Colin McCarthy, as not being commercially viable. That's of the 1.2 million acre estate. We'd like to see those, say, unviable plantations being transformed back to mixed native woodlands over a period of time. We'd like to see a training program for communities. It's not rocket science. Sustainable forest management can be grasped, and we could very quickly increase the level of knowledge at community level over a five-year period. We could use the existing Quilcha facilities. We're proposing a reformed Quilcha to use the 14 forest management units that they have as training centres to do this. The programme, again, as I say, would be mainly focused on looking at trees for local communities for energy, for firewood, with the cost of oil gone through the roof. And a lot of people now, moving towards stoves. We should have planned for this situation a long time ago. We didn't. And there's a danger again that people will start stripping forests. So there's a need to increase forest cover very fast. And also by coppice management of mixed native species, we can continuously renew the forests, and they will keep giving. Just on that on that point, the forest principles which are attached to Agenda 21 talk about the multiple functions of natural forests. That forest resources and forest lands should be sustainably managed to meet the social, economic, ecological, cultural and spiritual needs of present and future generations. These needs are for forest products and services such as wood and wood products, water, food, fodder, medicine, fuel, shelter, employment, recreation, habitats for wildlife, landscape diversity, carbon sinks and reservoirs, and for other forest products. Appropriate measures should be taken to protect fires, pests. This is from the Rio Declaration on the Environment in 1992, and again highlights the importance of the restoration of the world's natural forests. Just again, I mentioned peak oil is a reality. Climate change as well. Forests would mitigate against the worst effects of both of those. And for communities to have a future, they need access to this resource, and they need some advice. They need training, and again, it's like sustainably forest managed. It's a renewable resource that will keep giving forever. I was just looking for, there's an example just before I finish. The Menominee Native American tribe, they struck a deal with the American government in the 1870s, and basically what they did was they took on an area of nearly 250,000 acres and set up a kind of independent community living in the forest. And in an assessment of their lands in 1870, they counted 1.3 billion standing board feet of timber. Today that has risen to 1.7 billion board feet. And in the intervening years, the Menominee tribe have taken 2.25 billion board feet has been harvested. It's one of the examples, the prime examples in the world of sustainable economics. And it was practiced by, at the time, a so-called primitive people. Who were far from primitive. They understood the relationship with the forest, with trees. It's now the most ecologically rich forest in North America and contains more native tree species than any other. It is managed in 50-year cycles. They manage it from east to west. They manage it following the sun to maximise the light. They travel through it and they selectively pick and fell. They create holes. They copy nature basically. By the time the 50 years is over, they start again and they move slowly through it. That communities in Menominee have their own university, have their own hospital, healthcare, and basically the forest has sustained them. And it is said of the Menominee people that the sacredness of their land is their very body, the values of their culture is their very soul, and the water is their very blood. It is obvious then that the forest and its living creatures can be viewed as food for their very existence. So, thank you very much.
That was a great overview, and I'm going to pass you over now to Fergal, who is from the Keep Ireland Open organisation.
Thanks, Nicola. I'm here to tell you about Keep Ireland Open and our role in maintaining access to the forests of Ireland. Keep Ireland Open has been in existence for about 20 years, and no more than Andrew, we are seriously concerned about the proposed sell-off of Creature's harvesting rights. And I'm sure there are people among you who are walkers, and there are two signs that I'm sure you're very familiar with. There's private property, keep out, and the other one is trespassers will be prosecuted. There are signs which unfortunately are only too well known to walkers in Ireland. And that's how Keep Ireland Open came into existence. We represent walkers. We're the only group in Ireland which lobbies politicians and interest groups on behalf of walkers. And let me just give you our aim. It is to establish a clear legal right to responsible access to the physical heritage of the nation: mountains, forests, countryside, lakes, rivers and seashore. And as I say, we started up because people were coming more and more into problems of access, and more people have used forests as their means of walking in Ireland. One of the words that's in our aim is the word heritage, and that word was used a number of times in the Dáil debate a couple of weeks ago, and Richard here used it, not just about the wood and the land, but also the literary heritage of that Ireland has about its forests. And it's been written about by many writers and poets, John Synge, Seamus Heaney. And there's a lovely poem I came across the other day from the ancient Irish, translated by Frank O'Connor, called Kilcash. And I'd just like to read a bit of that to you. It's like a sort of a post-atomic situation. You know, what will it be like after these guys move in and take over the harvesting rights of our forests? What shall we do for timber? The last of the woods is down. No sound of duck or geese there. Hawks cry or eagles call. No humming of the bees there that brought honey and wax for all. Not even the song of the birds there when the sun has gone down in the west. Not a cuckoo on top of the boughs there, singing the world to rest. The crown of the forest is withered, and the last of the game is gone. This frightening scenario, but I think it ties in with what Andrew said, and the Indian concept of the forest as a sacred place. What is proposed by the government is a sell-off of not just heritage, but people's right to access to those woods. And there's a new survey actually which has just come out called Open for Jobs, which looks at the whole issue of access in Ireland, and is basically making the point that apart from access, there's money to be made for the nation, for all of us, if we have proper access to our forests. And let me just give you some of the points from that. Walking is by far the largest activity-based form of tourism in Ireland, attracting 740,000 overseas visitors, 4 times more than golf. According to a recent estimate, Scotland generates £1.4 billion pounds from nature-based tourism, and walking tourism is projected to account for 22% of Scotland's tourism revenue. That's Scotland. You then look at Ireland. Ireland has some of the most restrictive land access laws in Northern Europe, putting us at a competitive disadvantage in attracting walking tourism. And our way of dealing with access is a voluntary basis, and this report says that the purely voluntary approach to increasing land access has failed. Access routes are poorly documented, and a lack of legal clarity concerning the status of recreational walkers means that tourists and walkers are deterred from entering uncultivated lands, even where there is implied or permissive access. There have been 2 court cases in Wicklow in the last 5 years where people brought a case against a landowner for blocking a previous right-of-way or a previous mass path. In both cases, the landowner won. And effectively, the situation in Ireland is that there is no such thing as a legal right-of-way over land. And that's why we are trying to lobby people, politicians, to get access. We have been totally laughed at by all the political parties. Not one of them wanted to touch the issue of access, primarily because they didn't want to confront the farmer lobby. The only 2 politicians, apart from the man on my left, were Rory Quinn, who tried to introduce a bill that got shot down, and there's a present man, forget his name, who has also a Labour politician who has tried to introduce legislation. Let me just give you one other sentence from this report, and I think it sums it up very well. It's from a German tourist, and she says in a pure German, "As I am coming from Germany, I didn't expect or even think about access questions or problems, not at all. So I was more than surprised to see warning signs along the roads and at woods, sometimes pretty aggressive. In 2 cases, I was clearly warned by hostel managers about where not to walk in the surroundings. I can say that after this week, Ireland feels more closed than open to me." So we have a problem with access. And compared to other countries, we're pretty dire. Sweden and Scotland are the 2 sort of standard bearers who have practically open access. You can go anywhere you like with certain restrictions. And even Britain and other European countries, they have clear legal frameworks for walking routes. We have nothing, which is an absolute shame. And the reason we are interested in forests is that people, in the absence of other access routes, they go into forests. Anybody who's been to Crone Wood in Wicklow, you can't get into the car park at the weekend because it's full of people walking to Jouse or the Wicklow Way, other parts of Wicklow that they can access. One of the things that we are conscious of is that presently Croatia obviously has a lot of problems, as Andrew has pointed out, but some of them do provide very good recreational facilities. And one of those is the Wicklow Mountains National Park, which is a combination of Croatia and state lands. And they provide trail walking, hill walking, picnic facilities, cycling, horse riding, camping, water sports, etc. The fear is, and the question is, what would happen if these forests are taken up? Croatia in public hands is a vital concern to all recreational users of our forests. Britain tried a sell-off of its forests. There was a public outcry and it was dropped. And that's what we would like to see happen here. Finally, I was looking at the match yesterday in Lansdowne Road, I used to go to Lansdowne Road. I now go to the Aviva Stadium. And I just wonder, will we finish up with the Aviva Chrome wood? And God help us all if we do. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you don't mind if I stand up, because I tend to gesticulate wildly and try and rabble rouse as much as possible. And I really do want to rabble rouse on this issue, and I hope that, and I'm sure that what Andrew has said and what Virgil has said has inspired in people the sense of urgency of acting to save our forests. And I think both of them have described in very powerful and eloquent terms what a crime it would be if private companies concerned only with profit were to get hold of this priceless, absolutely priceless resource. Forestry, as both of our other speakers have described, is an unqualified good at every level in terms of our history, our heritage, as an economic resource, as a public amenity, as a spiritual good. There's nothing that isn't good about it. And it is seriously under threat. And we need to understand what that threat, if the poem that Virgil read isn't enough, just to realise what forces are trying to get hold of this resource. And most of you, I suspect, are reasonably familiar with this, but I mean, just to spell it out for the record, we know that this country has been bankrupted by the actions of bondholders, speculators and banks. The reason the government has signed up to sell state assets, including the commitment to sell off the harvesting rights to Coillte, is to pay off the debts of those institutions, those speculators, and who will own those resources if we sell them? The very same speculators, bondholders and financiers. It is an obscenity. It is an utter obscenity that could happen. It is really the organised, cynical looting of our natural resources by the people who bankrupted the country. And for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know it until Andrew St. Ledger explained this to me, that Coillte, set up by our friends mentioned in the earlier session, Ray Burke, Bertie Ahern, Ray McSherry and so on, at the same time that they were giving away our gas and oil resources, set up Coillte, and what Coillte has done since then is sell forests. Not just harvesting rights, but the land and the forests. They've sold them to various people, but coincidentally, 40,000 acres that have been sold over recent years. The biggest, I think, new owner of those forests is a thing called the Irish Forest Unit Trust, which is made up of Allied Irish Bank, Bank of Ireland, Irish Life, okay, and Coillte themselves, oddly sitting on both sides of the public-private fence, but gives you an idea of where they see themselves heading. That it's not just us saying in some conspiratorial fashion that Coillte is being set up and was set up for privatisation from the beginning, but they're already preparing for the privatisation by handing the land over to this gang. Or the crowd headed up, the International Forestry Fund, headed up by Bertie Ahern, which is a subsidiary of Helvetica Wealth, a Swiss bank that manages the wealth of the world's billionaires, and who see our forests as an asset that they can strip. And that's what they will do, strip it for short-term profit, with no concern whatsoever for the heritage value, the value to our society, the importance of forestry as an amenity, as part of our history, and so on. Short-term asset stripping, just as they've done. If you want to understand what they might do to a forest, just think about what our friend Tony O'Reilly did to Aircom, and the fact that, in that area of communications infrastructure, why we've the worst broadband in Europe, because Tony O'Reilly got hold of Aircom and asset stripped it. And that's what they will do to our forests, but with far more devastating consequences for our environment, for our society, for everything that we hold dear. So this is urgent, and I hope people will be inspired to act, because this is imminent. The threat to South Quilter's harvesting rights is imminent. Under the terms of the Troika deal, it should go through by the end of this year. So if we don't act now, it will be too late. And I really want to urge people to do that. And what's at stake is not just what they might do to this precious resource, but on the other side, as Andrew has explained, if we did it right under public ownership, the potential of developing forestry in the public interest is simply enormous. I mean, when you consider that Ireland has one of the, because of all the historical reasons that Andrew pointed out, the plantations and all that kind of stuff, we only have 10% forest cover as against 30% across the rest of Europe. Already it's a significant economic resource that generates about €500 million in revenue, about 2.2 billion of output nationally. As has been said, 18 million tourist visits with all the spin-off revenue, 12,000 direct jobs, as well as many indirect jobs. But actually that's a massive under-realisation of the economic potential when you consider we have the lowest level of forest cover in a country that historically was forest land. What we could do. And just to give you the comparison, in Switzerland they have 30% forest cover, they have 100,000 people working on the same amount of forest as we have under Quilter. So the potential for tens of thousands of jobs, huge revenues, as well as the protection of this precious resource and amenity. So that's what could be done if it was done right, as Andrew and Fergal have explained. Now, really, I just want to conclude by saying, what are we going to do? What can we do if there's something very, very important at stake? And I was saying to Andrew beforehand, we should have a mass forest walk-on, right, on some of the Quilter lands as some sort of protest in the next while, which would also be a nice, pleasant walk in the woodlands. And I asked him what would be a good place to do it, and he mentioned Parnell's house in the forest park in Avondale, which coincidentally that's where I developed my love for forestry, because as a teenager a big gang of us from Dunleary and Ballybrack used to go camping in the Avondale woods, and that of course is Parnell's house in the home of the Land League. And Andrew again was pointing out that the Woodland League's name is not coincidental with the reference to the Land League. And I think that's a good place to sort of conclude about what we've got to do, because we're back at that point in a way with the sort of struggle that Davitt and Parnell waged to protect the resources in this country. We've talked about the oil and gas, the water and all the rest of it, but I think it would be a good place for us to have a mobilisation, if people think that would be a good idea, to really ring the alarm bells, because I think people do not know that this is happening, and they don't understand what's at stake. And of course people are battered with the impact of the economic crisis, austerity, and so on. But here is a positive. It's not just about being against something. We're against it, big so, but we can point in a positive direction to the way in which, if we did this right, we could actually help this country in a real and tangible way, create the jobs we desperately need, benefit our culture, create revenue for the state. It is just a win-win-win scenario if this was done right, but it is a lose-lose-lose scenario if we let these gang get away with it. And I just want to conclude by saying that already, because of what Andrew and the Woodland League have done, what Fergal and so on have done, the fact that we got this issue raised in the Dáil is having an impact, because often we feel very pessimistic when we look at the forces that are arrayed against us and what they are trying to do, pillage our country at the moment, you often think we can never win these battles. But actually, we have struck a few blows even in the last few weeks. And I just want to refer to the Minister's speech, which shows within the one speech the impact that we've had. In the speech, the Minister, in the debate, pointed out factually the government accordingly agreed in principle in June last year to the sale of the harvesting rights to Coilse's forests as the best means of extracting value from Coilse in the short to medium term. And that says it all, doesn't it? Extracting value in the short to medium term. Forget about the long term. And we've agreed this with the Troika. But later on, in the same speech, and this was underlined by both of the ministers who spoke in the debate, he says, as with all state asset sales, this will only proceed if it makes economic and strategic sense for the Irish people. And in fact, Coveney, in the second day of the debate, said, we're now considering whether we will sell the harvesting rights. Now, how could they agreed it, but now they're only considering it, right? They don't want to admit they're contemplating a U-turn, but they are contemplating a U-turn because they're afraid, if the public knows what's going on, that there will be outrage. And why wouldn't there be, when you listen to what is at stake here? So, it's up to us. It's as simple as that. They are preparing for a possible U-turn, but they won't make that U-turn unless we mobilise and ring the alarm bells for the people of this country. And I don't believe anybody bar a corporate vulture would support what they are.
I suppose I'm an environmentalist, a human rights campaigner to a degree as well. Listen, I agree completely that it's vitally important that Coilse's harvesting rights remain in state hands. And I was just picking up on something that Andrew said. He said that it is important that we plant native species and not monocultures, presumably the likes of Sitka spruce and that kind of thing we want to avoid. Now, as far as I know, majority of new afforestation in this country is actually by private landowners. And we have a grant system to compensate farmers who plant their land with a certain amount of forestry. So I was wondering if we could incentivize the planting of native species by granting more money to the farmers who plant native species than the ones who go for the Sitka spruce or the monocultures that you were talking about. Just wondering about that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sharon and then Martin.
I have to say I agree, because this issue now with forests is vitally important. And what you were saying earlier on about, and I had actually written a note down on it just before you said it, Richard, as humans, we need to connect to nature. We need to go out into the woods sometimes, or go for a walk, go for a stroll, hear the dawn chorus. I mean, this also has an environmental impact on us with the birds and everything else and the wildlife. We're not born to live in a concrete jungle. So that, as humans, is vitally important that we do have those escapes and that peace and quiet and get the noise out of our heads from the cities and stuff like that. The one thing that's annoying me about all of this, and it's a big issue with me, and I really feel it should be exposed, is Bertie Ahern, again, his involvement in this. Not only is he, chairman of Coilse?
No, the International Forestry.
So he's gone from, okay, and he's involved in this, and what you'll be talking about probably later on is renewable energy, which is going to be a big push to go to. But he's actually involved in a big solar panel company, and they have they build these giant plantations. I mean, you're talking about acres and acres of these big solar panels. He's involved in that. They're looking to expand. He's in an area where we can sell forests off, strip the land bare, and what do we do with the next? Oh, let's push renewable energies, and put these solar panels out. I think that kind of thing should be exposed in his involvement, because if he's involved in that, it's going to be nasty. Definitely nasty.
I'd like to put it to the panel, and I'd like to put it to the floor, that everybody in Dublin needs to watch this, and I'm going to tell you why. The forests are in Dublin, the forests are down the country. Last August I was in Portland in America, and I know how important the forests are there. 4 years ago I met Dennis Banks, who runs the American Indian movement, and the forests are vital over there. But the reason Dublin people have to really look at this issue is very important. We have a Phoenix Park, and in the Phoenix Park you have bylaws, and to seriously injure the amenities to quote planning jargon, means that you cannot build anything outside the periphery walls of the park that would injure the amenities of one inside the park and outside the park. What that meant was that when they built the apartments on the Phoenix Park racecourse, they had to very carefully decide whereabouts on the racecourse to build them. I was successful against Dublin City Corporation, or Planala, when they tried to build apartments behind my parents' house. The media covered it, and I got great help from Tony Gregory Lauren Mercer. I reported as an Al-Qaeda security threat to Ours and Neutron and to the American ambassador's residence. Now, in Ours and Neutron, you have a clump of trees, which, to my mind, qualifies as a forest. So are they going to knock down the trees in Ours and Neutron and in the park? And why is it that along Cunningham Road, you'll see certain spots where they could not build apartments? Then what you've got to look at is the skyline on the Dublin Mountains. When you look at it, you see the Hellfire Club. And you've got to go right from Balrotry, Jobstown, working your way right across the whole bottom skyline in the direction of Bray. And you will see where the houses have pushed over and pushed over more and more, they're going more uphill. Years ago, that was land. And before that land was flat, there was trees on it. If the skyline and the trees that's on the forest, in the forest, is going right around in a semicircle, when we go right around to Bray, if private sector take down those trees, you end up with a situation with this city becoming like other cities around the world, which I've happened to be in one or two of them, where the cities go over hills. In this city, everything's relatively flat, and you look up the mountains. But in other countries around the world, the cities actually go over hills. 2 seconds. So therefore, for that purpose, and also for the purpose of the trees that they were put there in the first place to protect as a shelter, it's vital that everyone in Dublin addresses the situation, regardless of their politics.
Thank you. And then Melissa Houghton.
Hi, I just want to mention a movement I'm involved in called Bards in the Woods, and this came about through two Sligo-based poets called John Wilmot and Edward Durand. And it's small enough at the moment, but the idea of it was in response to the Quilcha sell-off, and it's to get people out in the woods. And on any given Sunday, people gather and they'll get guided or led or facilitated by a poet or a musician and come together in the woods, take a walk with stops, regular stops for poetry or music or song. And if we could incorporate that into the idea of occupying one of the woodlands, on one given day, the more we push to get people out there and using the woods, the more we're showing government how important it is to the people. And I totally agree with everything that's been said in terms of the economic potential, the spiritual needs, but there's also our physical needs addressed by access to the woods as well. And we just have to look across to Britain, where the plans to privatise there were met with a huge response from the public, and the government actually did back down. So as Richard has said, we need to get people on board. Having things that are family friendly to get people driving. There's actually one going on out in Massey's Estate up in Farnham at the moment today. So every Sunday from now until probably October, there should be Bards in the Woods going on in woodlands all over the country. And anyone who can get involved should do that. You can look it up on Facebook or on the net. But the government in Britain established an expert group to look at the evidence which made maintaining public ownership absolutely compelling. They found that it helps to tackle mental health problems. People living near a forest have less obesity problems, maybe because they walk, I don't know. Forests contain valuable habitats and species of international importance and has potential to create low-carbon material as an alternative to fossil fuels. So on every sort of aspect of the spectrum, physical, mental health, economic health of the nation, it's vital that we hold on to the forests, and we should do everything we can to get out and use them and encourage people to join us. Thank you.
I think the fact that the Minister in charge of the forests is not the Minister for the Environment and not the Minister for Heritage, but the Minister for Agriculture does say a lot in that they see it as a crop, you know, and that's they're not looking at the heritage or the importance for the environment. Just one thing I want to say, obviously, people like Andrew and Fergal and their campaigns have been working on this issue for a long time, and it's recently become more of a political issue, as it were, because of the plans to sell off that is kind of moving so fast. But I was recently reading the report that Impact did on Quilcha, and their interest is obviously because a lot of their members are working in Quilcha. But it's a fantastic report that really lays out the importance of Quilcha for Ireland. We had tried to get a speaker from Impact to back up the idea of the mass walk-on. I think it's a fantastic idea that we could do. Obviously, some of that stuff is already happening. If we could do that for one date in the near future, maybe set that date today, I think it could really launch this campaign. Because in Britain, when they tried to do this, there was absolute uproar, and the Tory government in Britain have backed down on plans like this. I think we need to create that kind of uproar here too.
Looking over, I was just going to make a comment about the big walk that we're planning. That you also would plan it for not just in Wicklow, but forests all around the country, and also to make part of the walks take in some of the areas where the forests have been felled, and to show that the difference that it is the country is when the forest isn't there. And that was kind of what I was just wanting to say. And also the fact that everybody in Ireland has a tree. We were given a tree for our millennium in 1988. And I think we all have to go out and say, our trees are not being sold, and keep them there for our children and our grandchildren. And that would be a big idea to put it up, use that as a part of the publicity for a big day, that we go out and visit our millennium trees.
Yeah. Yes.
Particularly people hate. And at the moment it's about obviously the mortgage crisis, people being thrown off the street, and also access to the land. Obviously this goes back centuries to British imperialism and so forth. I think we can win on this issue. I think the government are seriously frightened of the consequences of trying to impose this because of what happened in Britain, because of what happened across Europe. So I think I would be quite optimistic, probably internal optimistic, that we can actually win on this issue. And I think we really need to up our game, because there's loads of walk groups across Ireland. They affect all over the country, and I think that kind of walk of solidarity maybe sometime in summer. Like we walk from somewhere in some forest in the middle of Ireland, walk to the Dole, and I tell you, you attract thousands of people. Because there's as yourself, there's a famous song written by Ewan McCall, and he says, I might be a wage slave on Monday, but I'm a free person on a Sunday, when they walk through the forest. So I think that's the kind of message that we kind of need to say, and I think we can win, but it's all about what we can do in the next 6 months. Thanks.
Pillaging and plundering are the sorts of things that happen to oppressed and defeated people, and that's not where Ireland wants to be, I don't think. The previous woman spoke about the impact report. I have it here. In Sweden, they spent, I think, a decade and a half merging and privatizing their forests, and they decided to back out of that and do a U-turn. Maybe in terms of winning the argument here, some of the research that they produced to defend that U-turn would be useful here as well. And finally, Andrew mentioned that Jonathan Swift did a lot of propaganda work using a pseudonym, and there's a current belief that anonymity on the internet is a danger. I also believe that it's a great benefit. So rather than just go whole hog behind the idea that anyone who wants to remain anonymous when they're fighting for something just.
Sorry, well in Swift's case, what he was doing was considered treason. He would have been
Oh, certainly, sedition, and even in the early 20th century, sedition was treated as something. All right, thanks.
Sorry, yeah, they're just under pressure.
No, that's fair enough.
One last speaker down at the back, and then we let the speakers come back in.
Sorry, first of all, where's the chap about incentives for farmers you were asking? Yeah, it's a good idea. Unfortunately, the forest policy is centred on, again, mainly conifers, mainly monocultures of exotic conifers. It's a very narrow focused policy. There is a native woodland scheme, which is a small part of the forest policy grant system, and that should be expanded, absolutely, and there should be more incentives for our native forests and woodlands to be planted for all of to maximise the benefits. And that's something we need to lobby for, to change. As I say, reform of forest policy is vital. Just talking about the day in Avondale, it would be good to plant a tree as well, to do something positive, like planting a tree. Parnell was known as the Irish oak. His uncle planted Avondale, Samuel Hayes. Samuel Hayes was a United Irishman, and he would have seen the advantages of afforestation of Ireland, to have a future for Ireland to stand independent. I mean, we've never had that. It's something we still need to do, as Richard pointed out. We have a very low forest cover. The Impact trade union, it was good that Impact eventually came out vocal on this recently, but I just wondered where they've been since this was first mooted in 2009. I also wondered where was Impact when Quilcha had been selling. The 40,000 acres they've sold, Impact were very quiet. And, you know, I'd like to see more action from trade unions, or from all the rest of the trade unions as well. This is an issue that affects all our, children, grandchildren going into the future, and workers. The potential for, a tree economy, to create an actual tree economy is huge. The speaker at the end was talking about the need for us as a people. We've been very parasitic. We've been acting as parasites on the earth. We've been taking. All our technology, yes, we have to mine. We've got to dig into Mother Earth to keep mining. We should be digging up the dumps and recycling more, rather than looking for more minerals. We've enough metal dug up, we've enough minerals dug up. We should be just recycling more. And it is Mother's Day today, so it's kind of apt that that point is being raised about Mother Earth, and that the trees, in a sense, are the garden like the Garden of Eden. And our role really is to be the gardener and to manage that resource wisely for the benefit of all beings. And in a way, we need to be looking at a symbiotic relationship with nature and with the earth, and that's hopefully where we're headed if we're to have a future. And in time, all cities will be forested. All the motorways, the canals, the railway lines, they will be all forested. We need trees. It's already happening in certain places. In a city in Korea, Seoul was polluted at 100,000 car traffic a day, vehicles passing through Seoul, and they transformed it. They had buried the rivers. They dug up the river. They stopped the traffic. They planted up Seoul. Seoul, was suffering from smog, pollution, from temperature problems. The trees have balanced the temperature, and the water has cooled down the air, etc. So that's where the future is going to be, I would hope. So thank you.
Where I'm coming from in Keep Ireland Open, we reckon that key influencers in this whole debate are walkers. Like, the biggest users of forests are walkers. And I think Melissa's suggestion of pulling different strands together is very important. Certainly there's a need to pull the walking groups together. And if you look at Keep Ireland Open, Mountaineering Ireland, the Ramblers, tourists, you're looking at thousands of people who go into forests and use them. So there's a need to bring that together. I think the speaker who suggested the day in the forest, I think, is a wonderful idea, and we should follow it up. It should also be family friendly. I think there's a danger that we're seeing as a crowd of lefty loopies, and there's a need to involve a wider cross section of people. One other thing that we've found, unfortunately, on the whole access issue is that farmers, I don't know how to put this properly, but farmers have been a problem in that they do not want access over their private land. And again, this goes back into history. We've had a lot of discussion with farming groups. Initially, they wanted payment for any access across land. So I think an important constituent group to pull into this debate is the farming lobby. They're a huge influence, and we need to get them on side. One other thing that strikes me is that there's a lot of comparison with the oil situation. The Norwegian speakers talked about control of oil resources. Just think if you've got 8 or 10 private companies operating our forests. At present, bad knowledge wheelchair, there's some control over how and when forests are cut. And going back to previous forests, when I was at the Department of Forestry, my own mother worked in the Department of Forestry. I've spoken to 2 foresters in the past week, Christy O'Rourke and Crone, Peter Windsor down in Lara, and both of them said this thing is daft, the sell-off of forests, because it's putting, what was a very well-managed operation into different hands, be it...
Brilliant ideas, and the thing is we need to take these up. First of all, the question of Sweden, I think, is very good, in just the same way as we've used Norway as a very important counter model to what our government has done, and that's been quite effective. I think you're absolutely right, we should look into the Sweden thing. Do people think it would be a good idea to have a mass day of walk-on down in Rathdrum, down to Parnell? Because I think symbolically it would be important, and to link it in with the suggestion about we all own one tree. So we're going out to claim ownership of our trees and point out that the governments don't have the right to sell them. So, yeah, everybody's up for that. I mean, I don't know, maybe by the end of the day we can have a few of us can have a quick conflab and try for the last session to come up with a date, and if not, we'll work it out very shortly after this and get word out to everybody via the email list. Hopefully you have left your details down at the bottom, but I think we should basically be aiming to do this in the next 4 to 6 weeks really, and then try and get a big national sort of momentum going around this. So people are in favour of that. Okay, well I think if that practically comes out of this, and then we develop the coalition building around that initiative, pushing the petition, and obviously marshalling our arguments, our evidence, and our sort of international best practice internationally in terms of opposing the sale, we would be taking a big step forward. So hopefully that would be a good positive outcome for this meeting. So thanks everybody for that.
Just to say to you, if you could keep the break very fast, next down in this room, the ballroom.